Welcome to the Summit for Wellness podcast, where we help you climb to the peak of your health. And now, here is your host, Brian Carroll.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Summit for Wellness podcast. I'm your host, Brian Carroll, and today's episode is brought to you by Thrive Market, which is an online marketplace for all of your healthy food options. If you go to summitforwellness.com/thrive, you can get 25% off your first order and free shipping. So go check it out today. Now, in this episode, we will be discussing a health issue that a lot of people suffer from, and we see commercials for topical creams for it all of the time, and that would be eczema. And as we see all these topical creams come out, it makes you wonder, are we treating the symptom of something, or is the cream treating the root cause? And that's why I brought on my guest today, Dr. Stephanie Davis, who has a functional approach to eczema. Now, she herself also had eczema, and that is what kind of forced her into a position to try and figure out what are some ways to better handle the treatment options that are out there for eczema. So let's dive right into the conversation with Dr. Stephanie Davis and find out what the functional approach to eczema is. Dr. Stephanie Davis was a microbiologist and a biochemistry researcher before entering chiropractic school. She also has extensive training from the Institute of Functional Medicine, the Kalish Mentorship Program, the Hashimoto's Institute, and Ben Lynch's Seeking Health Educational Institute. Thank you, Stephanie, for coming on to the show.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Now, one thing that kind of stood out from your bio to me is that you were a microbiologist and a biochemist, and I would love to hear a little bit more about what brought you into the research field.
So I essentially my whole life wanted to be a doctor. You know, that was from the get-go. I've been super interested just in medicine and science and things like that. So I chose a major that I could use for pre-med. But when I was an undergrad, I realized that I really did not like the way medicine was practiced. You know, I had friends whose parents were doctors, and they had expressed some kind of displeasure with the system and how they felt like they couldn't give patients the care that they deserved. And I saw that, at the university hospitals. I went to Ohio State for my undergrad, and while obviously, it's a great, academic institution and they've got great hospitals, they just, again, people coming in for, chronic illnesses, you can't get to the root of a chronic illness with, 5 minutes or 10 minutes with a doctor. So I was frustrated with that. And I was like, what am I going to do? So I took my degrees and, kind of just went and did research, because there's not much you can do with those degrees, especially I'd say back then, other than, kind of doing research or teaching, it's stuff in that realm. So I did research, and at first I liked it. I worked for a couple of Fortune 500 companies, and I was in a microbiology capacity there, largely doing all sorts of testing on organisms and, learning a lot. And it actually translates now to the technology that we use for stool samples, incorporated some of that same type of technology. So that's useful to me, but it got boring. And I also really didn't like being just kind of a number. I didn't feel like I was contributing much to the world. So then I translated over to university research at the University of Minnesota Medical School. And that's where I did some more of the it was in the Department of Microbiology, but it was more like biochemistry research, actually on Bordetella pertussis and how it actually infects humans. So that was pretty cool, but academic research is really isolating and slow. So I was like, I kind of felt that urge to want to go back into medicine. And I knew I wanted to do something natural that, looked at root causes. And that's kind of how I got to, leaving the research field and moving into functional medicine.
Do you feel that starting off with research better prepared you to be able to dig into more information about different health topics now?
I would say yes, in many ways it has served me well. Like I said before, a lot of the technology that we used is actually what they use with stool samples and to some of the other testing that they do out there with regard to like the gut and immunology. And so it's good for me because now I know what companies are doing on the back end, and I can ask, the right questions. But also, from the standpoint of understanding research and digging a little deeper than, kind of some of the superficial stuff that's out there, I feel like, yeah, it's definitely given me a great base. And I use it today. I use all of that knowledge. And that's kind of why I started off in functional medicine kind of as gut and immune system specific. And I obviously have translated that into, kind of specifying in eczema. Now that's just a way, another name for working on, the gut and the immune system, because that's so much of where the root causes of eczema lie. But I just, for myself suffering from it and seeing all of the people, so many of the people that I've worked with in the past, having eczema as one of their chief complaints, as well as gut or immune system issues, it has definitely served me well.
And since you have had eczema yourself, can you talk about what it was like going through the different symptoms of eczema?
Yes, it was not fun. Because at first, even though you're trained in this, you go to school, a lot of people don't know this, but in chiropractic school, you still take, similar to, medical school and naturopathic school, you take a year of basic sciences and you take a year of clinical sciences, and then you go into your specialty, and that kind of builds up for your knowledge base to understand these conditions. Like you're going to take things like histology and pathology, and then eventually take dermatology. And so in my brain, I obviously know all this stuff. And when I see it in patients, it's easy for me to identify. But on myself, it's for me, it started off on my hands, and my hands started getting a little bit red, and then they had these little dots on it. And I'm like, okay, this is, interesting and new. And it was really itchy. And it eventually, it started off just kind of, pink and bumpy and itchy. And then the more I scratched, the worse it got. And it literally turned into like full blown eczema. And it happened at a time in my life when I was really, really stressed out. I was like, I would say one of the peak stressed, times in my life. And there's no surprise to me that it happened then. It took me a little while to identify it in myself. And that's when I was just like, I really need to start looking at this deeper in my patients, because I knew that it was horrible for me, because people see your skin and they're like, oh, there's something wrong with you. Even though we know obviously eczema isn't contagious, that's the way people look at you. And then you don't want to, you don't want to go out in public. You want to kind of stay behind closed doors. Since it was on my hands, I didn't want to touch anyone or shake hands. And even my little one, they see stuff like that. Little kids are really brutally honest, and he would kind of recoil and be like, oh, what's on mommy's hands? And, it was not fun. And I would say, to kind of add salt to the wound, is because I was in such a stressed place, I was breaking out too. So my face was breaking out, my hands, and it ended up going to my feet too. Feet were breaking out as well. So it was kind of a nightmare there for a while.
And at that moment, did you correlate it to stress, or were you still trying to figure out, why is this all happening to me?
I knew, just because of my training, that stress was probably my primary trigger. But just because of, the functional medicine training, I knew that I was going to have to dig deeper into treating it. But I would say I didn't take that approach at first. I think a lot of functional medicine practitioners, and I'd say, just healthcare practitioners in general, we kind of, I'd say, compartmentalize or kind of put to the side our symptoms or treating ourselves, and focus on treating other people. So I was doing the bare minimum at first. I started kind of tweaking my diet a little bit, taking out some foods, and, using some topical salves. And, that helped a little bit, playing with probiotics and a couple of anti-inflammatories. And that all helped a little bit, but it would go away a little bit, but not completely. And then it would cycle. I would go through anytime I got the least bit, stressed. And like I said, when it flared initially, it was in a time there was a lot of stress in my life. And that was like waxing and waning because there was a lot of transition in my world. And there were things that kept on coming up that would cause me stress. And every time I got stressed, it would get worse. So eventually I probably did that for about, I want to say 6 months and 6 to 8 months. And then I was just like, really, you need to do what you do for your patients. So I actually did the whole gamut of testing that I typically do on my patients that would come in for something like this. And that's how I got to the bottom of it. I found a lot of underlying causes for me.
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful things for a practitioner is to go through the same things that their patients go through. So for you going through having the eczema symptoms and then having that opportunity to test different things and see, is this going to work? Nope. Is this going to work? And go through that whole process and then to sit down and really break it down like you would if you were a patient. I think that's a phenomenal way to really be able to connect with the patients that you do have.
Yeah, it really is because and before, I got into functional medicine because I was frustrated with the system to begin with. I myself had, suffered my whole life. I had, allergies and I had, hormonal issues in my teens and then early 20s and migraines. And I had all the post-birth control issues. And that was one of my main reasons for, doing what I do. And I also had some gut issues. So it all kind of, I understood where people were coming from, but it really wasn't until I had eczema that I was like, wow, I'm like, this issue is profound because nobody really talks about it. It's one of those things where people can see it on the outside, with eczema and psoriasis and dermatitis, any of the various types of dermatitis, that you can see that on the outside and people respond to it. And it adds another psychological dimension to it that I think is super important to address. That, I'd say in functional medicine, we're getting better at making sure that, that psychological and kind of trauma piece is addressed, but it's still one of the more underserved areas of treatment. And I wanted to make sure that I was, getting to people and talking to people about this because I know I tell my patients, I'm like, I felt like a leper. I wanted to hide. I did not want to be in public. I did not want to have people staring at me. Even in my own, family, I had people who kind of like look awkwardly and be like, what's that? That is not fun. And that adds a whole other layer to having a chronic illness because most of the people that come to me with eczema is part of, their many, chief complaints on why they're coming in. It's usually eczema coming in with hormone imbalances or eczema with other autoimmune conditions and eczema with GI issues. So that's actually how I started, seeing a lot of people with eczema in the first place was because it was part of their issues. And I've seen so many GI people, eczema is typically something that would accompany so many different GI conditions.
And you've mentioned a few times now that a lot of times it starts out on the hands, or you see it a lot on the hands. Is there a specific reason why it's on the hands so much?
It's, they don't know that. And that's not something that any of us know. That's something that I've actually talked to some of my colleagues in other specialties about, more of the people who are in like Chinese medicine, because I have a feeling that it probably has, where it manifests for you most commonly probably does tie back to something systemically. But I'd say right now, obviously, conventional medicine doesn't have an idea why that is. And functional medicine, we know where the root causes are coming from, but we don't necessarily know why it's showing up in certain places. I will say this about it's the type of eczema you get on your hands and feet is called dyshydrotic eczema. And that particular type of eczema, I think part of it is the fact that we wash our hands so often and our hands touch everything. So you have a lot of opportunity to have a reaction there. But I think that, me having little ones and then also, when I was working in an office, when I had a brick and mortar practice, you're washing your hands a lot. So I think that tends to be an issue with the dyshydrotic eczema. But, I would say as we don't necessarily know why that, it shows up. Some people get it on their hands and feet most often. Other people get it, on their, the basically inside of their arms and on their wrists and, backs of their knees. Some people actually get it on their other sides of, their knees and on their bellies and things like that. We don't know exactly why, but I have a feeling if there's a place that's going to know about it, it's probably somewhere in Chinese medicine that probably has some kind of correlation.
Right. There's a lot of roots that go back to Chinese medicine, and it's kind of interesting how much of the functional medicine practices that are coming out now have roots that stem back to that traditional Chinese medicine. So it's kind of cool to see it all come back around.
Absolutely. I think we have a lot that we can learn from traditional Chinese medicine.
So you've mentioned conventional medicine and functional medicine a little bit. Mm-hmm. Can you go into a little bit more detail about the differences between conventional treatments and functional treatments?
Sure.
Just so that people understand what those differences are.
Yeah. So to give you a kind of a broad stroke overview, I would say that, conventional medicine tends to look at issues in isolation, where functional medicine looks at, it's more of a systems-based approach, looking at all aspects of, your body systems. I always tell people to kind of imagine a tree, and that's why you'll see, a tree on my website and some of my blog posts. I kind of use the tree as the picture because it really does illustrate a great difference between conventional medicine and functional medicine. Because, if you were to say, use the tree analogy, the conventional medicine is really going to be looking at one branch, where functional medicine is going to look at the roots, the trunk, all of the branches, and even kind of in some cases go all the way out to, to the leaves, because that's what you need to do to get to the root causes of what's going on. And so as that would translate to treatment, when I was told that I had eczema, I knew it. I just wanted somebody that I knew to confirm it for me. And they're like, yeah, you have eczema. And it was somebody I knew that was a medical professional who did some, holistic medicine, but not a ton, and was just basically, there's not a whole lot of, we don't know many causes of it. You can try maybe tweaking your diet, suggested taking out some of the major allergens, but was like, there's no known cause, no exactly defined known cure. So I was not happy with that answer. And I was like, since I know everything that I know, I was like, I'm going to dig into this further. And I knew from my training that, it can be anything from, you're going to have the gut issue, because most people who have eczema do have a leaky gut, because to actually express, eczema in the autoimmune focused way, you would have the genetic predisposition. And I do know that I have some of the genetic predisposition for having that, because I do have a family history of allergies, asthma, and eczema, which is the allergic triad. That's something we look for in, when I'm taking a history on somebody, because that gives you an increased likelihood. If you or any of your family members have that, you've got a genetic predisposition for having eczema. The leaky gut, I have, gone back and forth with that. And if you're really, really stressed out, there's a really good chance you're going to have a leaky gut, because basically the stress process creates inflammatory chemicals that are going to cause a leaky gut. And then you have to dive into, what else is going on in the gut. Can it be, just general dysbiosis, which is going to be an imbalance between the good organisms and the bad organisms in the gut? Do you have an overt gut infection? Is there an autoimmune process? You got to walk through nutrients and nutrient absorption, specifically regarding eczema. Your fat soluble vitamins like vitamins A, D, E, and K are going to be really important. As like vitamin C is going to be important as well. Minerals such as like zinc and magnesium and iron and fish oil, because that's, those really good healthy fats are going to be really important to having good, just cell function and good integrity of your skin. Making sure you're absorbing your proteins. And then, those are some of the more basic root causes. I mean, you can get into a lot of people have hormone imbalances, not just in, the stress hormones, but thyroid and sex hormones. So estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone can also, have underlying causes for eczema. And then you can get into like some really, really deep stuff that I won't necessarily get into right now, but it's looking at like some really in-depth biochemistry. So like some mitochondrial function, and you're looking at like organic acids testing, that type of stuff. And then also, getting deep into the genetics. Like if somebody were to do a 23andMe, I mean, there are a lot of issues. And then like you and I talked about before the call, we were talking about, SIBO and some of the other, issues that can be major underlying causes. So what we typically call like hidden infections, that they will be things like, mold or, the mycotoxins from mold or Lyme or, tick-borne illnesses, things like that. There's just a very wide array of what the root causes can be. And, we basically have to, look, if you're looking on that tree, you're looking at every branch and every leaf to try to figure out what's going on. But in my practice, myself and the other practitioners, we take a very systemic, we have a systematized approach, because we kind of do it in 2 tiers of testing, because for the vast majority of people, you're going to be able to figure out all of their root causes with some, basic testing. For I'd say about 25% of the people we work with, they're going to require maybe a little bit more digging. And that's usually pretty evident from the beginning, but not always.
Yeah, and for people listening in, this might sound very overwhelming to them, but that's why you go to someone like yourself, who's a practitioner that focuses on trying to figure out where these root causes are. And you were talking about that in your practice, you break down everything into systems.
Yeah.
When you're looking at all the possible root causes, are you also breaking those down into categories as well, or are you just sticking to those 2 systems you were talking about before?
No, we basically are looking at categories, just like the functional medicine model would look at. You've got everything that's going on, in the gut. So that's anything from, the leaky gut to, dysbiosis or the imbalance in the good and bad organisms, to GI infections, to your gut function purely. Are you, do you make enough, digestive enzymes or stomach acid or bile to actually have proper digestion? So we're looking at all of those. And like detoxification, that's a huge one for eczema. We're looking at, your detoxification functions. We're basically looking at everything. When somebody comes in, we kind of do the initial testing that we order is definitely a broad stroke approach, so that we can get a good snapshot of what's going on in the entire body. At that moment, we don't necessarily do like a lot of really super in-depth testing. Like at that point, we typically don't go for testing for things like mold or Lyme or heavy metals or some of the kind of the deeper issues. Unless somebody's history is kind of screaming that. Then, because for sure that it's probably an issue, we might go testing there first. But like I said, typically for most people, by looking at the gut and the immune system and the detox and nutrients, and just cell function, basic cell function, you're going to be able to help the vast majority of people. There's only that smaller segment where we kind of have to escalate to that second tier of testing, where we have to go to some of the bigger root causes.
Right, and taking that broad approach too is a lot cheaper for the patients as well, because once you start digging into mold and Lyme and a lot more comprehensive testing, it can get very expensive.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I always tell people, just because the way I approach treatment for people is the way I would approach it for myself. And I always try to look for the test that's going to yield the most information for us to basically validate what I've heard on somebody's history. Patients tell you what's going on. Most of the diagnosis is in the history, and you use the tests to verify that and to also gain some, knowledge pieces that you will need to inform your treatment. But that's essentially why we do that. I'm usually looking for the tests that give you the most bang for your buck, because if you were to do all of that testing up front, if you suspected there might be heavy metals or suspected there might be mold, you could get those tests back and they would have maybe come out negative, and you would have spent a whole lot of money on that. So that's why we take the approach that we're doing. We try to be practical about it and keep in mind the cost.
Have you found some main starting points that seems to be the most prominent within your patients?
Yeah. So typically when we build treatment plans, we are kind of going from the ground up. So what I tell people is, if you're thinking about your body as troops, I'm like, you want to fortify your troops before you go into battle. And that's essentially what you're doing for your cells. So what we're looking at the beginning is basically tweaking and supporting just good biochemistry. So we're looking at supporting the cells and the cell membranes and repleting basic nutrients. So your vitamins and minerals and fatty acids and electrolytes and things like that. So we're usually doing that. At the same time, we're trying to work on, getting the inflammation down. And then also the next thing we would move into is, more like detox. For depending upon the person, you can work on all of those things at once, but some people we have to segment that out a little bit. And then from there, we usually work on, balancing the hormones and working on the gut. And when I say gut, usually we're working on the gut and the immune system at the same time. And that's how we do our treatment plans. We basically have people, do something for about 6 to 8 weeks at a time. And then we keep on, revising the treatment plan, because I don't like the approach where you throw the whole kitchen sink at somebody at once and, say, hey, I'll see you in 3 months or 6 months, because it's hard for somebody to wrap their brain around, and it's hard for your body to figure out, what am I doing with this abundance of, either food or supplements, or, sometimes we'll use like the medical foods or protein powders. That's a whole lot to be throwing at somebody. So if you segment out the treatment, I think it works better. And you also have less side effects, because when you're working through this with eczema, especially, or any other autoimmune issue, you can have some minor flare-ups while you're working through the process. I'd especially say people who have detoxification or lymphatic drainage problems, they're probably going to have a few flares or, I would say just bumps in the road in treatment. And that happens for everybody. What I tell people is, what's going to happen is we'll get into treatment. You're going to have, you'll start to feel some, symptoms. You'll have some good days. You'll have some bad days. But as you move through, the good days are going to become more frequent, and the bad days are going to become less. And I give them an honest time estimate too, because this is not something that goes away overnight. If you talk to people who have truly, put their eczema into remission, most people will say that it takes anywhere from, 9 months to 2 years. And that's a realistic, estimate. And I'm totally upfront with people about that.
You make a really good point about not throwing the whole kitchen sink at a protocol, because what happens is, like you were mentioning, that could stress a body out, which can kind of defeat the purpose. But also, it can be really defeating to the patient as well, because it's so overwhelming, everything that they have to do.
Yep, absolutely. That's something we try to avoid, because, working through this is hard enough. Let alone dealing with that, having a treatment plan blow up on you. So And that's something that we always tell people when we're working through things. I always say we can dial things back if the symptoms are becoming, overwhelming to you, or you feel like at any point, even mentally it's becoming overwhelming. We can dial things back because, the point is to get through it. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Another thing I really like that you mentioned is trying to provide more of the micronutrients into the protocols as well, the vitamins and the minerals and other nutrients as well. Because a lot of people, they just think, let's cut out the gluten, let's cut out the dairy, and that's going to fix everything, but that's not necessarily the case.
No, it's funny because that was, for me, my diet was already clean. And I know a lot of other people I know that have eczema that are kind of in the, healthcare provider space. A lot of us had already done that. Because I follow a paleo style diet, I had already eliminated all of the major, allergens from my diet. And mine was while I do have issues, mine tend to be more with histamine. It was definitely not the diet that was my main problem. It was, stress and some of the other underlying imbalances. And I think that is a misconception out there. A very big one is that, you can have, creams or emollients or lotions or potions that are going to fix it. That's not really going to help. And, cleaning up your diet will definitely help to some extent, but it's likely not going to solve the problem. I feel like those two, when people resolve their eczema with topicals or with, with diet, those are kind of like the unicorns out there. It's usually a lot deeper than that. And you have to do a lot of, turning over all the right stones to figure it out.
And you've mentioned detoxification quite a few times now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about why that process is so important?
Yes. So basically, I don't think people think about this, but your skin is one of your major detoxification organs. And I don't think people think about like the relatedness between the gut and basically the gut and the immune system, because let's be honest, they're very tied together. And then the liver and their interplay with the skin, because if you think about it, your skin, it's a barrier organ, just like your gut is. Your gut, is a barrier organ, and it also, allows nutrients selectively in and keeps them out. That is exactly what your skin does. And your skin also has immune cells in it too, very, very similar to the gut. And then your liver, its goal is to detoxify, take any of the wastes that come in from the outside or wastes you generate through your own metabolism and eliminate those. And it's going to eliminate that through urine and feces and through, sweating. And so that's where, there's a marriage between all of those areas of the body. And so when you have issues in the gut and the liver, you're going to often it'll show up on your skin in the form of, anywhere from acne to redness to a rash, or on the extreme end, eczema or psoriasis. But making sure that you have the ability to take the toxins that are in your body, transform them into things that are more inert, and effectively eliminate them through the gut and through the skin is a really important process. And lots of times that's a missing piece for people, whether it's because of, they don't have the right nutrients. Those, we do some, genetic testing to figure out sometimes in certain people why those processes aren't working very well. If they're too inflamed, if they've got too much of an inflammatory burden, or they've got really bad hormone imbalances, that can cause a problem there. So there's a lot of reasons why, detox is not working. Also, if you have a high body toxin burden from other things, not just, the normal everyday, toxins that you would, come across in the environment, and then internally, if you've been, storing toxins like heavy metals in your body, or you're now seeing the effects of some of the pesticides out there, and, all of that type of stuff, all of that can, hinder the detoxification process too.
Yeah, and like you were saying with the genetic testing, you can check out the methylation pathways and a lot of other factors that all play a role. But I love that you're looking into the detoxification pathway, because that's one of the areas that I see a lot of people need a lot of help with, and it's so important for the body to function the way that it should be, to get the detoxification pathways to function properly. So it's awesome to see someone else looking into that as well. So
yeah.
what are some of your favorite nutrients for the liver?
It depends. So I'll say there's two different ways I approach this. If I have somebody who I don't have the genetics on, I'll definitely have an organic acids test on them. And I will use that to see if they're depleted in some of the B vitamins are obviously super important there. Oftentimes the population of people I see almost always have issues with glutathione not having enough, which for the audience, that's, the master antioxidant in your body and probably one of your main detoxification pathways. So we support that with glutathione and the nutrients that you need to help recycle glutathione. So things like ALA and vitamin C. I also use liver support. So, some of your herbs, I usually use combination products that have things like, milk thistle and dandelion and things like that in them to support just good liver function. And then some of the other ones that have amino acid blends that are going to help support those actual detoxification pathways. So when I'm not dealing with somebody who has genetic information that we can look at and see some more specifics, those are usually some of the approaches that I'm using for, detoxification treatment.
Awesome. That's great. So pretty much this entire podcast, you've been talking about finding the root cause. So I have a question in regards to topical agents that a lot of conventional practitioners throw at eczema.
Yeah.
Is there a place for topical agents, or is it kind of a waste of time and money?
No, I definitely think that there is a place for it because, having gone through it myself, anything that can give you relief while you're treating it is going to be helpful. And I'm a middle of the roader when it comes to any kind of treatment. I'm not, 100% natural or, totally anti-Western medicine. I think that there is a time and a place for everything. And so that's actually some of the people I'm working with, they'll say, hey, I feel like I need to use a short course of steroids because my flare is so bad, or they will come to me on them. And I'm like, that's okay. As long as you're not on them long term, that is totally okay. And that's, if it's topical steroids, again, that's okay. Just short term to help you get through your daily life, without you relying on them or using that as your treatment. I think that's the case with anything, whether you're using, herbal salves or shea butter or, coconut oil or, if you've ever looked at my Facebook page, I've done some Facebook lives on this. There's a ton of different things you can use topically, naturally. And even, there's a lot of topicals out there now in the, like Eucrisa is a medication and obviously the topical steroids, using things short term to help you are going to be useful, but it's not something I would rely on. And the other thing that I would say, the other qualifier about topicals is there's a lot of trial and error involved with them. I can tell you, I don't know anybody who, I can just say, hey, try this one. And it usually ends up being the perfect, match for them because everybody's skin is so different and everybody's bodies respond to different things. So there's usually a little bit of trial and error involved in figuring out what topicals work best for you.
Awesome. So you can use the topicals, just make sure that you are also working on the root causes as well.
Yes.
Okay, let's dive into some fun questions here. So what are your routines to help yourself avoid eczema breakouts?
So, obviously, stress management is my number one. And I would say I'm good about it 90% of the time. I have two little ones. I've got a 5-year-old and an 8-month-old. So sometimes stress is high. But I would say in keeping my diet clean, I will say that when sometimes around the holidays, when I stretch my diet out a little bit, I start to feel a little tiny bit itchy. But I can usually get it back under control. But I definitely keep myself on a cleaner diet just because that's the way I live. I choose to eat largely whole foods and a lot of vegetables and things like that just because it's a healthy way to live, not because I'm necessarily trying to avoid things. I know particularly, and I've known this probably for a long time, and I just didn't want to admit it, that corn is likely an issue for me. That's, I would say, one of my bigger issues. And if I eat too many histamine containing foods, like really, really high histamine containing foods, that can eventually become an issue for me. But that's a whole other long topic that we could speak to for hours. But those are kind of my issues. Also, I think what comes kind of part and parcel with the stress levels is hormone balance. I noticed when I got my hormones across the board, so thyroid, sex hormones, and your adrenal stress hormones. When I got those back into balance, I was in a good place. So those are the things I try to focus on. But really, so much of it is in the lifestyle. If you're sleeping right, sleeping well, breathing clean air, using, basically low toxic load products, very natural, products in your skincare routine and also in your home. If you're moving your body and if you're, getting out, into nature, you're probably going to be in a much better place and be much less likely to have flares because I really, truly believe so much of it lies in the lifestyle. I tell people, like, I'm just a piece of the puzzle. I'm a conduit for, treatment. But really, what I want people to take away are the lifestyle pieces, because that's what's going to get you healthy, form your base for health and keep you healthy into the future.
Okay. And another question for you is, do you have a morning ritual to prepare yourself for the day? And if so, what is it?
I used to before I had kids. Now I'd say it's much more pared down now. If I had my way, I do like to oil pull for the effects on, detox and lymphatics, but also for the oral, microbiome and the balance of organisms in the mouth. I do that a couple days a week. I used to do it ritually every day. And I also, now I basically only have time to set my intentions for the day. And I do that. And I think that's really important. I used to meditate first thing in the morning. I don't really have time to do that now. So I try to fit either meditation or deep breathing in sometime throughout the day when I have a moment of silence to myself. But that's how I start my day off now.
When you set your intentions, do you write it down or do you just keep a mental note of it?
Most of the time it's a mental note. Sometimes I'll come right downstairs and write it down, write it down on a piece of paper too. But most of the time it's a mental note.
All right. And one last question here. If you were walking down the street and you randomly met a stranger and you had 1 minute to teach them one way to take care of themselves, to be the healthiest them that they could possibly be, what would that be?
I would tell them to find a spot in nature, whether it's, a patch of grass, a field of flowers, or, a nice spot under an amazing tree. Just go there every day and sit there out in the sunlight and nature for, 10 or 15 minutes on a daily basis, because I feel like you're getting so many health benefits from that, from the grounding effects to the effects of sunlight and, vitamin D production and everything that, all of that being in nature does for us and how it, decompresses you and takes away stress. I think that would be the best thing that they could do.
Does it matter if it's a small park within a big city, or do they have to get out closer to like the mountains or the actual forests?
I would say it could be anywhere. The research basically says your eyes need to be seeing nature. So seeing the green and seeing the trees and the flowers and whatever you're looking at, but that's what it is. I actually think there was a study done, and it was done on people in Japan in a city park. So that I think it is just the fact that you need to be in nature and not necessarily the locale. But from my own experience, I'd say the deeper you can get and kind of more isolated you can get, the more profound the effects probably will be.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed too on our backpacking trips. That's like the best I ever feel, because you're so far away from everything else and you're just breathing the clean air and drinking fresh water. I love it.
Me too. Absolutely.
Okay, so on your website, drstephaniedavis.com, which I'll have links to in the show notes, you do a phenomenal job of really breaking down these different health scenarios that people might be going through. And I love that you're able to make it really easy for people to understand. And I also know that you have a little freebie for people. Can you talk a little bit about what that freebie is?
Yeah. So basically, we've talked a lot about the root causes of eczema. A lot of it is in diet, and that's a good place for you to start working on things yourself where you don't necessarily have to have a practitioner. So what I have is it's a guide to the hidden causes of, triggers and histamine that in your diet that you might be missing. Because for, eczema and any other autoimmune condition, I think there's a lot of talk out there about, some of the superfoods and probiotics and other things that actually might be making your eczema worse, even though, mainstream media will say that they're awesome for you. So this is a guide that helps you navigate through all of that and maybe identify some things that you can eliminate to help get your skin going in the right direction.
Is that right on your homepage?
Yep, it is. So it'll give you the option to, basically put in your email address, and then you'll get that report sent to you.
Awesome. And what social media platforms are you on?
I am on everything. I shouldn't say everything. I am on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. I do not have Instagram yet. Unfortunately, I feel like there's only so much I can manage. I've had it on my list of things to do, but I do not have Instagram yet.
And then do you see patients in person, online, both?
We see people virtually. I used to only see people face to face, but I found that we can reach people, all over the United States, and we actually work with international clients too, depending upon where you are located. So we have a much wider reach being able to work virtually.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Stephanie, for coming on. I'm glad to have you on to talk about eczema and ways that people can figure out how to rid the eczema off of themselves. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
If you would like that free guide that Dr. Stephanie set up, then go to drstephaniedavis.com, and it is right there on the homepage of her website. Also, she was on Eczema and Psoriasis Summit a few weeks back, so if you want to learn a lot more about eczema, then you can go check out that summit. There was a lot of really great speakers on there that are all talking about different approaches that you can take to help yourself with eczema. If you enjoyed this episode, then please leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It really does help to get our podcast out in front of more people. So if you go to summitforwellness.com/iTunes, it'll take you right to the page to leave us a review. Next week, we have on Amy Slater, who is a fitness professional and also runs a blog over at Moms for Health, which is a blog teaching moms how to provide healthy options for their families and their kids, which she knows a lot about because she has 2 sets of twins that she is taking care of right now. So that will be next week's episode. Keep climbing to the peak of your health, and we will see you next time.